someone in D.C. might be going on the naughty list because we've seen over 1,500 pages of the CR that the House put forth, and it's filled with things like a congressional pay raise and an Obamacare exemption for our elected officials. And Speaker Mike Johnson tried to justify it earlier today on Newsmax.
We don't normally like what's called a continuing resolution, a CR, but in this case it makes sense because if we push it into the first quarter of next year, then we have a Republican-controlled Congress and President Donald J. Trump back in the White House will be able to have more say over the funding decisions for 2025.
Here to break it all down is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and our Blaze senior politics editor, Chris Bedford, who's been explaining all of these fights in his latest Beltway briefing. Chris, it's interesting because we've seen an incredible amount of blowback to this bill online, and it's not just from lawmakers. Elon Musk is getting into this fight. So is the pressure now from the public square enough to make Mike Johnson go back to the drawing board for the CR?
Oh yeah, I think this is dead on arrival, and I have not seen this really happen in the 20 years I've been in D.C. or the years I've been covering this. That the Uniparty gets this kind of blowback. I mean, what the speaker said there was correct in some levels, and I've written about this and we've talked about this. That they were supposed to pass a CR that would allow them to have a funding fight again in March when the Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House, so that they couldn't get their hands tied on Ukraine, they couldn't get their hands tied on border provisions, et cetera. But this is not what they did. They ended up passing, granted 3 months, but a massive spending omnibus. And in order to get Democrats to the table, because they were kind of dispensed with a lot of Republicans, that they didn't even bother bringing the conservatives to the table, they needed to hand out basically Christmas gifts to Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and his friends. And the response has just been exploding. Since this finally dropped late last night. And now you've got Elon Musk, who is threatening to run every single day of the year, every year of the calendar, PAC that actually tries to have an impact on his spending priorities and what he's pushing for. Then you've got Donald Trump coming out with a statement against it. You've got J.D. Vance coming out with a statement against it. Mike Johnson is stuck in this mess in the first place, partially because he tries to please everyone. And that's not really a winning tactic when you've actually got specific constituents to put you there in the House of Representatives and then beyond them in the people. It's been a failure for him, but I don't see a world where Mike Johnson tells Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk to take a hike on this.
No, I mean, how would he be able to go to the Army-Navy game and hang out with them on the plane if he's not able to do that? I guess my biggest question just off the bat is, how in the hell did you not see this coming? I mean, in other words, manage expectations. I mean, I can see an argument to say, look, this is not going to be so good, right? But here's the reason why I'm doing this. I mean, whatever it is, you have to get out in front of this. And it's just shocking to me that this wasn't predictable to the speaker.
There's no strategy there. I mean, the speaker and his chief of staff, Dan Ziegler, have been out there. I've heard one longtime Hill staffer sent me a message asking if they were the worst leadership combo in history. There's no strategy. There's no outreach. They lost the support of their committee chairmen, who are not included in this. They didn't even really try to get the support of a lot of the more conservative members. The Democrats obviously have no real interest in seeing them succeed. But even then, I mean, you often do get away with these sorts of things. In Washington, D.C., you give everyone candy, you give everyone treats, you say we don't want a government shutdown, you go home. That's totally easy. It's business as usual. It's what happens every single December. Mike Johnson is happening to be speaker at a time when people like Musk are very vocal politically and are really on this Doge thing, at a time when Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have taken on renewed interest in these sorts of things in a way that Trump maybe hadn't when he was president the first time. He got all these things came together, but honestly, it's more surprising to me that they got caught than that they thought that they were going to get caught, because it's so rare to see big government handouts just blow up in the face of the Uniparty. Usually it ends up being conservatives who get dumped on in these sorts of fights.
Yeah, we're talking about Elon Musk, and he posted almost 60 times earlier this afternoon. And he came out and said that any member of the House or Senate who votes for this outrageous spending bill deserves to be voted out in 2 years. Now, Bedford, I want to go big picture with you, right? Because we look at Doge a lot on this show, and I think that we have been cautiously optimistic about what it could potentially do. Now, What does this say, though, when we see something like this and we see actual movement, and you said off the top you hadn't seen this in 20 years. What do we have to look forward to with Elon kind of sitting next to Trump and saying, okay, you know what, I can go out there and be your bully pulpit and make things happen and speak directly to the American people?
Well, this is an optimistic sign for those people who do want a smaller government. I also hadn't really been paying too much attention to Doge. It seemed like kind of a classic project to keep a couple of major donors and influencers busy in a way that DC so often ignores. But if they end up taking a scalp in December before they're even in power, then maybe there actually is something here. I mean, we saw that the cutting craze and the primary craze of the Tea Party about 14, 15 years ago, and that passed. That went away. The voices who were still calling for spending restraint were somewhat in the wilderness. And a lot of what Trump's agenda has not really been shrinking the government. It's kind of similar to Ronald Reagan. He had a couple of objectives. One of the main ones was the defeat of the Soviet Union. It wasn't really the deficit. You started to get that later on with the actual cutting. And Trump was in a similar vein. But this was a show of strength that if you're one of those more small government libertarians, which is what Elon Musk has been repeating ad nauseum down at Mar-a-Lago, he keeps on telling people we need small government radicals. He says that over and over again like it's a magic spell. Well, this actually was a fairly interesting demonstration of his power and his access to the president. Now, of course, once Trump's actually in office, and it's not Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer out there who are calling the shots, well, then maybe his tune will change when some of the things that he wants to get through happen. For example, when you need to get Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski to vote for your massive expansion of funding to pay for the deportation and border security, they're going to end up probably taking a lighter touch than some of those treats that they're willing to give senators and congressmen in order to get them on board with the agenda. But right now, this is a strong start.
So this thing tanks. What happens next?
I think everyone gets a little ticked off, but they end up probably with a clean CR, something that just continues government funding for right now at or what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump just called for in a combined tweet, which is a clean CR that gets funding to hurricane victims as well as some funding to the farmers. The farmer thing might be difficult. Some of the money that was being sent to try and bail out struggling farms is one of the reasons they ended up in this mess in the first place. I think a lot of Americans are united in wanting to support disaster relief. They'll have to offset that with some costs. At the end of the day, I think they might end up with what looks a lot more like just current spending levels pushed forward 3 months, a delay to the kind of bailouts and help that they want to give to struggling farmers and struggling hurricane victims until Republicans are all here together in January. Now,
there have got to be a number of people in the House thinking to themselves, I should be Speaker right now. What do you think this says about the Johnson Speaker reign? We've talked about this for a while in terms of timing. It certainly doesn't make him stronger. So how does that look?
I think it means more carve-outs for what he's going to have to give to different people, but he's stuck in a little bit of a bind here. The Republican Party doesn't really have an appetite for a speaker fight. They're exhausting. Mm-hmm. If Johnson makes some wrong moves by the end of this week, though, and loses support of Donald Trump supports a different speaker, then that could be a whole different scenario. But right now, in January, Trump's going to want it to be about him, his new administration. He's going to want to spend all of the momentum that they have on confirming nominees, on working on his different agenda items, the border control and deportation being first among them. He's not going to want to waste any energy, any breath, any airtime on a speaker fight. But conservatives, for example, could make some concessions. Maybe put someone like Congressman Chip Roy on the Rules Committee, as head of the Rules Committee, give different conservatives different options. But how are you going to satiate people like Jason Smith, who's currently the chairman of Ways and Means? He's already got a chairmanship. He was promised that he was going to be included in any kind of negotiation process for an end-of-year CR. He was excluded. So you can't give him anything to satiate him. All you had was your word, and Mike Johnson spent that. He's in a tenuous position that will allow, if he maintains Trump's support, which I suspect he will, then conservatives can probably take a pound of flesh. But like you said, a week in speakership starting the year.
Well, Bedford, we have about 30 seconds left with you. This is our last show with you before the end of the year. Any final thoughts? Anything that we should be looking forward to?
Oh my gosh, are we wrapping it up? I can't believe it. Keep an eye on that. The number one game in town is going to be the nominees, and how exactly also they're going to try and deliver on the deportation and border security mixed with the spending and the tax cuts. That's something the Republicans are really going to have to figure out over the next year. But in the meantime, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Bedford's our best gift that we have here on this show. Thanks so much for joining us.